Okay, good morning, everybody. So, thank you for joining us this morning. And it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Jennifer Thompson. Dr. Thompson brings a human first perspective to cancer research and care. Through her work with Held Stories, which is something that she authored. She advances the narrative as a structured ethical practice, one that supports narrative stabilization, strengthens research relationships, and moves us from representation toward genuine participation or genuine partnership. I'm sorry. Please welcome me in joining. I can't speak this morning. Please welcome me in join me in welcoming Dr. Thompson. The brain is not working today. Go ahead,
It's too
Jennifer,
early in the
whenever you're
morning.
ready to go.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen. There we are. Mm. Ah, we good?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone can see. Okay, that's good. So first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. Um, When I was first asked to speak about storytelling and advocacy and research from the perspective of being personally a survivor, I'm an endometrial cancer survivor. Didn't say that in the introduction, but again, that's my connection to this. What I realized is that this perspective includes not only lived experience, but reflection of how survivor stories are invited, how they are shaped, and how they are used. So I'm not here to simply tell my story, which actually I probably won't tell much of, but I'm here to talk about how stories function inside survivorship care and research and why purpose matters. I need to get, hmm, why is my clicking not going? There we go. All right. The power of story. Cancer disrupts narrative coherence. Diagnosis fractures the story someone thought they were living. Survivorship is not only medical recovery, although that's important, it is also narrative reconstruction, how we make meaning, rebuild identity, and decide what we trust. Story is how we make meaning after disruption. Story reconstructs identity after diagnosis and treatment. Story shapes belief, behavior, and trust in care. Um, I'm going to go on with this, but this is personally very important to me. When I was diagnosed, well, between the time I was diagnosed in 2022 and went through treatment, and now I have probably been through 4 or 5 therapists. The first therapist that my team found for me, and I was treated during COVID, said to me basically, this is something that happened to you. I know, like you have a cold or you had a splinter in your hand or something, but you're still you. So, sort of basically, you need to get over this. So, I think she's wrong. It's a different story. I like to say to people, I don't even think I'm the person I was before I heard the words, forget the treatment, the diagnosis. I'm just a completely different person altogether from that happening. All right. Yeah, so story is really important. It does all those things for us and has all those all those functions or whatever. So that makes it important. And I don't think that typically when support uh, patient engagement or support groups offer this, they think very much about that. What is this? It's a story. That's something we hear very commonly. We want your story, or I'm telling my story. Um, all right. So why does it not want to do that? Moving ahead. The project that revealed the gap. So there are gaps in this for me. Last year, I was chosen as a CancerNation Elevate ambassador. And in order to be a part of that group, a part of the cohort, you have to have a project. My project was a writing or storytelling circle for Black endometrial cancer survivors. I thought this would be a great idea. I have creative writing, storytelling, literature, teaching, all of that in my background. I thought this is great. This will be something for the women to do. What I wasn't thinking about is those things that I just said, which is how the stories are invited, how they're shaped, and how they're used. So, needless to say, the circle itself never materialized, and that's okay. What I learned was learned from my attempts at recruitment, from survivors in other spaces, and an absence of Black survivors in research and support spaces. And I talked to many groups in the Chicago area and actually outside the Chicago area about partnering in this endeavor with me, putting this group together. And I found a lot of people, a lot of support. So it wasn't so much that I couldn't find a space to do it, but probably more problems with recruitment and getting people to be there. So I thought, something is going on here. So I started to listen in the spaces that I am in, to what the survivors were saying, the ones who showed up, the ones who also didn't show up, the ones who I met, on the street or, as I was getting my own treatment or in my own spaces, who talked about what the purpose of this group was. Well, okay, we hear you and maybe, but you're doing this why? So I learned a lot from that. I also did some additional research, but I did want to say that. Um, and this is what this suggested to me is that recruitment reveal barriers, right? And also absence. I think probably almost everyone in this room, if you really dealt much with survivors, you know that endometrial cancer survivors are one of the groups that's hardest to recruit. And even though we represent a large number of the mortalities, and there's a big disparity in our healthcare. So the medical profession knows that we're here, but we don't show up in places. So I started to think about what that absence might mean, to do research, and again, to talk to survivors in other spaces, including research spaces about what they wanted, who they were, why they weren't there. And what I found out or came to the conclusion was that is the absence itself is data. The fact that they are not there is data for us as people in the support community, but also researchers. If we are not there, there's a reason for that. And I think that absence points to trust, access, and design misalignment. One of the things that I found, and I was guilty of this in my original design also with the writing circle, is not talking or communicating with the survivors themselves about what they wanted. I'm a survivor, but in my original design, one of the things that I can definitely say is that I was working more from my experience as an educator, my background as a creative writer, all those things, rather than what the women actually wanted, or even asking questions like, is there trust here, or do you feel safe? One of the questions that came up, as I'm saying often, was the why. Why are you doing this? Which is an interesting question, and I don't always have the answer to that. There we go. So there are two general purposes of survival storytelling that I find. One of them is meaning-making stories, which are always going to be non-linear, layered, very often unfinished, which is probably where I am right now, but I never thought about that. But meaning-making takes time, and also is going to change. It's not always going to be the same thing. The other sort of line of stories that you find, which is probably more common, is representative stories, stories that are structured, coherent, and institution facing. So I'm thinking of stories that would appear like on a website for a cancer center or a health facility or an advocacy groups or whatever. So the stories are out there, but I think that those stories are way more, again, structured, coherent, and all of that than what the stories are if you actually get the women someplace and say, what we're doing with this is we're making meaning with the stories. So while both of these are valid, I think that the purpose must be named. And by the way, I don't think I've ever gotten a straight answer when I asked a pharmaceutical company, an advocacy group, or anyone in patient engagement when they said, we want your story. I don't know whether I got one single answer that was particularly satisfying. And that's not a criticism there, but I mean, just something to think about. We want your story, but why? That's a legitimate question, right? And that often came from the survivors themselves, other than me. So although they're both valid, I think the purpose has to be named. And I think that when it's not named and they're confused, right? The purpose is confused. What the survivors experience is pressure, fatigue, and retreat. And one of the things that I experienced, and I got this from other survivors that I talked to too, again, this sort of pressure. If someone says it's a pharma company, even some of the advocacy websites, basically there's a kind of scripting or sort of channeling or guiding, even if it's gentle, to what that story should look like. So I'm going to go on and say some more about that. Okay. So when the purposes of these stories blur, one of the things that can happen is that the survivors are pressured to simplify, to inspire, or to tie up. It's nice and neat, right? So maybe it's a video and you get 3 minutes of this video, or here's a script, and we don't want it to appear as though it's an interview. Here's the question, here's the answer, but we're giving you the script and you know this is where we want you to end up, right? So we're going to end up with a narrative, but it's guided by all of this script. Um, Big Pharma is really guilty of that. I thought, okay, but who had input even in deciding what these questions were or what the script was? So you end up with a particular narrative or particular story that I'm not sure is necessarily useful to the survivors and the participants in terms of meaning making. So I think that that can be an issue. Um, Meaning making stories help the survivors to metabolize experience, right? They are nonlinear, they're emotionally layered, and often unfinished. Representative stories are structured, institution facing, and again, are often shaped to be coherent and easy to place in public settings. In my experience, when I had a script, or 5 questions or 3 questions I was supposed to respond to, we never ended up with my story in the pieces of it that I think are important, and not just for me, but probably the things that are most important for the researchers or anyone else working with me too. So, who gets to script this or who decides what's meaningful is important. So both these tracks are valid, but in terms of health stories, what I'm trying to structure on is the latter, right? Ethical story telling, right? That has um, boundaries to it. Um, Sometimes survivors can feel pressured to be a good survivor, right? So there are 2 tracks of this. I thought one of them is how grateful I am and sort of how wonderful it was. I got great treatment. I'm still here, all of that. And that's valid. And the other thing, of course, is that trauma piece, right? Where it's like, oh, and it was terrible and all those things happened or whatever. And while all those things are true, I'm still not sure how they help the survivor, right? How are you strengthening the survivor in terms of meaning making here? So the health stories program that I'm putting together or that I'm proposing actually requires boundaries and purpose that are clear. Maybe there'll be time to talk about this later on, but I've worked this out. There are covenants, very often when you're working with researchers, I mean, it's common that you have informed consent statements or whatever. But what about covenants, right? Things that say to the survivors, I'm going to sign this with you, and this tells you what your rights are and what they're not. And I've actually worked out, I don't think we have time to go through all of that, what the forms actually look like, but actually I'm taking this quite seriously, so they are that extensive. So I think when meaning making, when they're blurred or whatever, what happens is you have survivors that do not feel safe, and you end up with a story that is not actually helpful to the survivors or whatever when those purposes blur. There we go. Um, there we go. So what I'm proposing, this ethically contained narrative practice, I called it health stories because there are stories, including written stories, that are part of what I envision this being, but they're ethically contained, as in there's no pressure to produce, and the stories are not things that are necessarily shared. In fact, probably for the most part, at least for a pilot, they would not be. So, health stories is trauma aware, consent centered, and survivor paced. It is not therapy. It is not testimonial collection, and it's not data extraction, which I realize is going to be a bit of a sticking point for researchers anyway, but that's exactly why patient engagement is where health stories belongs and not with the translational or the behavioral researchers, at least not at this point at the beginning of it. And again, when I say data extraction, very often when we're survivors are asked for our stories, it does feel like that. And I don't think that this is not a criticism. I don't think that they're designed that way by the people who are designing them, but it feels like, our bodies go through all these things that we go through in terms of, the cancer or whatever, surgery, chemo, radiation, the scans, all of this goes on and on and on. We're being extracted in all these other places and somehow made to feel like a commodity. And somehow that needs to not be the case or whatever. This really needs to be about partnership, right? And when I say trauma aware, I do not envision this as something that would be, I would be the facilitator for it. I do not envision it as something that requires a therapist or an MSW, although I don't mind that if someone wants to attach to it or someone who's a behavioral researcher, but it's not necessary or whatever. What we're really working on is narrative and narrative stabilization, and not extraction there. I'm envisioning health stories, the space of health stories is something that is safe for the women, something that in some ways ends up being, I don't want to say designed by the women because I do have a design, I have a facilitator's manual and all of that. But what actually happens, aside from whatever it is I've set up, is largely up to the survivors, what they write, what they don't write, what happens with what they write or say. There won't be recordings, won't be a part of this. So what I'm envisioning is so what happens in a session? 90 minutes with 6 to 8 participants and a trained facilitator. It begins with a clear purpose statement. Again, as part of the recruitment, we'd be signing covenants with them so they would know what to expect. But also, this is clear. This is the purpose of it. This is what we are going to do with your material. This is what we are not going to do with your material, which is also something that's not typically clear. Um, when writing or storytelling is the focus of a particular support group, as I've done that before and I participated in a lot of them. Either what happens typically is you get the writers together and you say this is sacred space or this is safe space and they write and nothing ever happens with it, including maybe the facilitator never knowing what happens or maybe that information not being shared even with other participants. Um, with other participants or whatever. So here it would be clear. All of that set out, and I have those documents I've already created also too. So the agreements include things like no fixing. We are not here to fix each other. So it's not, even though I have a background in writing, we're not going to talk about structuring. You need to bring this out more and that because this is going to appear on a website. That's not the point. It's having sessions that by the time we get to the end of it, help the participants to make meaning. So no reframing someone else's experience and no pressure to share. As I said earlier, absence is data, but I think silence is data too. If you have a support group, just like years ago, I spent time in the classroom, I got that. When my students were silent, that was information too. We live in a society where mostly people are uncomfortable with silence, but silence is not a bad thing. But it gives us something else to think about, right? So why are we silent or what's happening there? So the reflection would be prompt based. Again, sharing is optional. I do anticipate that, if the women are there and they start to feel comfortable, there will be sharing. But again, this is not performative. There's no pressure to, oh, there's that prompt and we're here. So I have to say something. No recording, and the stories are not automatically converted into institutional content. Containment is the structure. The structure creates safety, and safety builds trust. And trust is what I'm after here. Practical applications. This would begin as a small pilot, a cohort, facilitation preparation, clear consent pathways, and a clean separation between healing spaces and recruitment or publicity. We are looking for outcomes such as engagement readiness, reduced narrative fatigue, stronger trust, and more sustainable participation. Those are the goals of the story, of the workshop or group. Uh, you probably can't see all of my diagram slide, but I want to see what I have in mind would happen over these 6 sessions. We start with the survivor experience. And I want to go back for a minute to this, what happens during the sessions. So say, for instance, the first session that I have where we sit up and we talk again about their consent and what's going to happen and what's not going to happen here. Probably going to start with two readings. So, like the first session I have in mind now is a reading for Lucille Clifton, who some of you may know and some of you may not, but she's a Black poet. And then a secondary reading from Howard Thurman, who is a very well-known Black theologian. So we would work from there to the prompts that we had, and we probably start each session with that. So we're starting with their experiences, moving towards meaning making and narrative stabilization. And I want you to see that these two things are not necessarily, even though I have them, like one thing happens and then the other. I think probably what realistically would happen is that meaning making and narrative stabilization would go back and forth. So sometimes there'd be some meaning making, the narrative would stabilize, we would move to the next session, and this creating their own stories or making meaning out of them because it's a process might shift around a little bit. Ultimately, though, what we're building is trust, um, trust in each other, trust in the structure, trust in research and being in the space, and also finally building an equitable partnership, right? A partnership where the women feel like this is not something that they are participating in or something that's being done to them, but something that they're in partnership with. Um, so survivor experience, meaning making space, which is the health stories, narrative stabilization, and a trust with the ultimate result of building a trust infrastructure and equitable partnership. This is important, this part of it. This is a bridge. It's not a pipeline. Survivorship care often begins at treatment. Research engagement often begins at recruitment. Health stories builds trust infrastructure in between. So this is not, even though it's really important that this should be research adjacent, the promise is not, we had this group and they're here, and now we're going to move them over into research. Part of this covenant or this contract that we're signing with them says this is available. And that would be one of the deliverables too, because I think I can see everybody probably asking that, well, who would fund this or how do you get this done? Because there are no deliverables or whatever. Ideally, if this works and you start with that 6 to 8 people, at the by the time you get to the end of it, at least half of them are willing to move on to phase two of the project, which is we can now transition you into working with researchers in the research space, which would be the ultimate goal. Survivorship is clinical. Survivorship is relational. Survivorship is narrative. Survivorship is ethical. Story is not decoration in survivorship care, it is infrastructure. And a couple more remarks I wanted to make just before I close. Oh, and finally, dignity is not decorative, it's structural. I am trying to design a process that allows the survivors to continue to have their dignity and to go through the process with dignity. So, in closing, if we want research to be more responsive and more relevant, we cannot begin with data collection. We have to begin with conditions. We have to begin with dignity. Health Stories is one way to create a structured, sustainable environment where safety is prioritized, pressure is reduced, and informed participation can grow organically. For community engagement leaders, this model offers something concrete, a way to strengthen trust before asking for involvement. It separates preparation from recruitment, and it ensures that when partnership does occur, it is informed, voluntary, and compensated. This distinction matters. My hope is not simply to run a program, but to contribute an engagement infrastructure that academic health centers can adopt and adapt, one that centers safety, clarity, and choice as prerequisites for meaningful collaboration. Thank you.
That was excellent, Dr. Thompson. That's just so important hearing that story, exactly what you talk about this whole time. It clinically, I'm not a heavy person in research, but I know clinically talking to patients about their story and letting them open up about that really tells you what is important. And that's
Yes.
the same thing in the research as well. And what UIC fosters a community. We have members of our review committee for research that are survivors.
Hmm.
And they help to structure that and inform that. And that's why we have such a significant, I say, Jeanette, just all the applause and raising her hand, of course, because she's with community engagement. And it's important to get those survivor stories to help inform us what survivors need and what's going to sustain them and bring quality of life back for them. Jeanette, did you have something more to say?
Thanks, Debbie. I actually had a question. I know you talked about working with survivors and having them involved in research, and I was just curious, what type of research projects have the survivors that you've worked with been involved with?
Well, I
Any
was gonna say, so
examples?
health stories is still in the planning stages now, but
It
I
is.
do work with
Okay.
survivors. So we started out, sort of talking about my narrative background. So I'm city certified now, and I actually am working with researchers at the University of Chicago. And I also I'm part of the CARG board now too. So yeah, the survivors or whatever who are actually there. And again, the stabilization, right? So I don't see that all the time, but I can tell that was at work here because we were prepared for those roles in particular ways. They make a difference because otherwise you have people come into a room and this is not anti-survivor. I'm a survivor. It's not anti-institution. But if you have these narratively stable survivors, the information you end up with is different because even I work with big pharma too, and some of the pharmaceutical companies say now they design these structures that they bring the survivors into. And then they say things like, okay, if I hear one more thing about the colors of the website or this thing or that thing, and I say, okay, but you designed this, and they haven't had an opportunity to realize that that's not what's important, right? When did someone say first, what's really important to you here? And so the survivors already knew that or would know that when they came into the room. So
Right.
instead of just this, I call it the trauma response. When I first started telling my story, I was all over the place. Now, pretty much, I say, I'm an endometrial cancer survivor, uh, rare histology, not the good kind, still here. And really, I mean, I could say some other things. Oh, and I love my team. So I had really wonderful care. And the other pieces, they may come out later on or whatever, but much more stable about it. So it's much more reasonable when I deal with anyone now, other survivors, the researchers, because I understand what's important to them, but also what was important to me.
Jennifer, could you stop sharing so we could see you?
Oh,
Your
can you
slideshow.
not see
Thank
me? Oh,
you.
yes. Let me stop sharing.
Thank you. That would be great.
Okay.
I wanted to also share that on our team, Courtney Lewis, I think she's on the call right now, as part of our team in the Community Engagement and Health Equity Office. We did a first iteration of a survivorship boot camp, and we're trying the design one now for coming up in April. And the big focus of our survivorship boot camp is helping the survivors start writing and telling about their story. So, listening to what you're saying is really, really helping inform the work that we're doing. And so, hopefully we can find a way to connect you to the work we're doing here at the Cancer Center, and that you could be like kind of a sounding board for us as we develop these sessions for our survivors.
Oh, I would love to be involved. I mean, it's no mistake. I think that UIC, not that I'm saying someone else can do this, but you all are ideal for this, right? The kinds of things you do, the PCORI grant with, the brigade grant and the things you're doing with breast cancer survivors. I mean, you're an ideal home for this, but that doesn't mean you have to do this with me.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. I will definitely, I don't know, Jeanette, do you have Jennifer's email or should I send you a connection to?
Yeah, no, I don't think I have her email. That would be
Okay.
great. Thank
I will
you.
definitely connect you. I want
Awesome.
to shout out Claire had to leave, Claire Testman in mental health at UIC. Excellence is really profound, and I'm so grateful for this work and the way you formalized process for challenging and meaningful experience. She had to run, but she would love to put people in touch to work on this and connect people on this, help facilitate when this takes off. So I will also connect her to you, Jennifer, as well as our team. And, this is something we love promoting survivors and empowering people through being able to tell and share their stories.
And I just wanted to say this really quickly, if I could, or whatever. So I just wanted to say this because I do realize, again, if you're asking for grants because there may not be funds already in place for this or whatever. So you have to go to a funder and they say, deliverables. Everybody wants that. What are your metrics? So I just wanted to say that in the pilot phase, I'm aware of that because I tried to use PCORI and NIH, who are really big on patient engagement, to sort of model this. So the core deliverables from the pilot phase, and again, I see this happening in several phases, implementation of that 6 session small cohort model, completed facilitator fidelity checklist for each session, plain language participant materials, the agreements, the boundaries, the pathway options, process focused evaluation summary, and an optional count of voluntary post cohort pathway selections, right? So, how many of these people, now that we've explained, this is a way for you to maybe move into doing some things where you're actually working with the researchers? How many of the people can we get to do that? Instead of, they stopped, this one came to 2 sessions or whatever. We started with 6, and my goal would be, or we started with 8. My goal would be definitely we have, say, 6 left.
Hmm. I believe, Dr. Ganshaw, were you off mute? Did you have something you wanted to ask or contribute?
Well, I just want to really make a comment. Thank you so much. This was, I think, just sort of having a structure around how to do this and sort of separating out like what it does and what it doesn't do, right? And what it is and what it's not is so important as we often hold a lot of patient stories, right, in the clinic when they come in. Sometimes they just want to talk through that whole
Mhm.
and sort of understanding how to support them and not like jump in and try to problem solve, but just letting, you know, patients sort of talk through it. I think there's so much value that we get from that. I think just from like thinking about how to improve healthcare, because often these stories include some kind of trauma, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and they often include, bad experiences with, or just identifying ways and opportunities to really, I think, improve the way that we deliver cancer care. Because I mean, I'd love to blow up our system and recreate the whole thing. But I think that, in the meantime, I think that some of the narratives that I hear often really inspire me to try to make care better,
Yes.
right? And so,
Hmm.
uh, I think that having and sharing some of those, um, those gaps in healthcare can really be another important, you know, contribution of these narratives, right? Is like elevating some of and amplifying some of the issues that I think we can bring back to, hospital leadership and clinic leadership in the oncology space, right? From these really important. So anyway, I really appreciate all that you're doing, and I hope that that's another way that, you know, that we can use this information to try to make the experience better for the next person.
Well, I really hope so too, and I think you're right. The stories are so important, but again, hopefully after this 6 weeks or so we did this, the stories would be clearer, right? Because when someone comes in and it's like, oh my goodness, because I've been at those sessions too. Someone comes in and they're screaming or they're immediately crying or whatever, and that's important. But after 6 weeks, it'll be clearer. So when they come and they talk to you or whoever's actually in the oncology, it's like it's still my story. But I've got clear information now. See, that the
Hmm.
piece
Yeah,
that didn't work was, the chemo, the person should have done this or that, or why didn't my doctor tell
Right.
me whatever? Because clarity is good. It's good for the
Mhm.
patient. So I'm,
yeah,
I'm I'm concerned about the patients and the survivors, but I'm also clear that I want the researchers to have good information because I want y'all to find a cure for this. Like I said, I've got a rare histology. Y'all don't even know what to do with it now. So please let's find the answer to this. So yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we find that in clinic too. And after seeing some survivors for just years, you check in with them later and it's like they are more organized with their thoughts and everything. Like you say, when I first come to you, it's just pouring out this whole story. but being able to structure that over time
Mhm.
and like kind of pull out and hone in on components, what was really important about that experience is, it's helpful, it's powerful, and it helps survivors identify parts of their experiences too that they might not have otherwise
And
identified.
maybe give them a space. So again, I'm glad for my training, glad for the researchers I work with, having someone in the space. I'm a human, I'm a survivor, or a human who became a patient, I'm a survivor, all those other things. But I also understand how the system works. So although this is not for me, it's for the survivors primarily. I'm part of it. So I have to talk or whatever too. There'll be ways in this space to talk about that, right? So which you all might not have time to do. It's like, yeah, again, that chemo piece or that surgery piece or whatever. I got that, but part of the reason that happens, or what might have been happening there, is not to change their experience, but now you have a frame for it. That
Hmm.
wasn't really bad doctor. That was, this is sort of the way this is done because these are the protocols, or this is the standard of care, or this is because I've got those pieces too. So it's a bunch of different working pieces as a facilitator that I'm hoping to be able to bring together. And all that's sort of structured into the
Hmm.
facilitator's guide and all of that I'm working with.
Courtney, what do you got?
Hi, good morning, everyone. As Jeanette was saying, I'm on the team with, the survivorship workshop that we're putting together, and it was just a pleasure to hear your perspective on how you're starting your workshop and what you're working on. It was just very insightful, but I also really appreciate you saying, that you do give the participants the space to be raw and real and honest. And if they need to come in there and they are upset,
Mhm.
that's okay.
Mhm.
And I think that is, one of the pieces that we're, trying to work on as well, just giving them the space to be who they are,
Mhm.
feel what they feel, and then moving into helping them structure it, but not
Yes.
changing the integrity of their story. So I really appreciate you saying that because it makes us feel like we're kind of on the right track of what it is that we're trying to do. And as Jeanette said, we would be really excited to just share with you more of what we put together and see what your thoughts are on
I,
what
I
we've
would
been
welcome
doing.
that because again, very definitely there are small prompts. I'm not trying to tell anyone what their story are, but all these years in the classroom and narrative theory and as a writer myself, there are ways in which you can help guide them to where
Your
they need
story.
to be. Not where I want you to be, but where you need to be
And I
as the
think that,
particular.
like you're saying right now, I think that we're on the right track with that because we do have prompts. They're all prompts that we encourage them to fill out. So I'm hoping that you will kind of see what it is that we're trying to do and welcome the work that we're putting together. So I look forward to having your email and chatting a little bit more. But
Okay,
thank you
no, I
so
welcome
much
that. I'm
for
looking for collaborators, so which is why
yeah.
thank you so much, Dr. Mans, for allowing me to do this. I thought I
Yeah.
need to find some people to say, I'm
Yeah.
doing this. Would you help me or would you like to work with me?
Have you joined or shouted out in the Cancer Survivorship Provider Network?
I have not.
It is free to join, everyone who's here. If you haven't joined, you can look up CSPN, Cancer Survivorship Provider Network, and they have over 1,000 providers across the country who many are here. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you for that too, because I was going to say, and again, I don't realize I don't have endless time here, but in terms of recruitment, I've even thought about
Right.
that too. And I definitely need a research center or somebody to help the oncologists, the
Yeah.
navigators, the social workers. That's the way to recruit. The way this
Yeah.
is traditionally done, we're not.
Exactly.
So that's
Exactly.
where this is going to have to come from. So I
Yeah.
definitely need a health
Yeah. You
center adjacent.
You need the
Yeah.
folks that are the boots on the ground talking to the
Yes.
survivors. And yeah, thanks, Dr. Ganshaw, putting that in the chat with the organization. And Michelle Kirshner is the director of that program. She is wonderful and would be able to connect you. I'm actually going to start another email to connect you with her because I'm sure she would know of how to connect you to other other centers, other organizations, other places that would help with your recruitment. Do you work with any like community organizations? I know you're with CancerNation, but ACS, Wellness House, Gilda's
Yeah,
Club.
I have been in touch with all of them, and actually, it was through some of them that this idea about how it's a problem, right, to
Right.
recruit this particular group of endometrial cancer survivors or whatever. So yeah, I have been in touch with some of them. So that's not a critique. It's this is
Yeah.
really all all hands on deck, right? I need
Yeah.
all the help, all the people saying, "Gee, this is something you might consider, or you might want to think about here. This is for you."
Right.
Sort of personal invites,
Yeah.
rather than the yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Recruitment sometimes is the trickiest part for
Yes.
studies and things. Anyone else have any other stories you want to share with us too? That Dr. Thompson can comment on. I know oh, Barb, do you have something? Barb, I think she just came off camera. So I wasn't sure if anyone had anything else. Um, if not, I have many emails to send to connect you with many people in groups. Um, let's just see here. Tamara, did you have a comment? The Director of Yeah.
I think this is amazing. And like second everything that you said. I mean, the recruitment is difficult, and story meaning making is really important. I'm curious about the connection between like meaning making and then involvement in research, and what happens to the stories after. I mean, do they just keep the stories, or is there a plan for what to
Well,
do with the stories?
Well, there would be. So I want to be clear, I'm not forbidding people to write or do this. And one of the offshoots of this could be that, we decide there are people, okay, this is really great, and now we're going to spin this off into something more. But ideally, what I'm hoping is that this is preparing the survivors to move into more contact really with the researchers and the providers and all of that. So I am open to that, but I'm clear in the covenants and the consents, the way I've written them up or whatever, that that's not necessary. Do you know what I'm saying? If you don't want to do it, it's okay. I would be really happy if you would just go over here and work with these researchers now
Right.
because it's really important. But if you'd like to, I'm open to this other piece too, fine, we can write or whatever, but that would be structured maybe a little bit differently because now I think they would be stabilized or whatever. And I'd be happy to do that. So my educational background or formal training includes creative writing or whatever. So I run workshops and those kinds of things. So I would love that. I would love to see this collection of stories by them. But yeah, I can see the reluctance that has come up and people's suspicion in talking to other survivors or people who don't end up in the spaces, right? Talking to people on the street. I do work through other groups or I do some one-on-one through some of the survivors groups or whatever. And I say, would you do this? And it's funny the things you hear. It's like, well, what for? Or, it's fine to talk to you, you're safe, but now you want me to be someplace else. And then it's like, well, there's safety and there's safety. Let's keep talking about this, because it's necessary.
Yeah, not everyone is there. There's always a population that's
Mhm.
challenging to connect with,
Yes.
right?
And maybe it'll come out of this as some women who don't know they're writers. And then that's something we can discover together. And I could write that up in my report, although I'm not going to include the story transcript itself, but I could
Right.
write that up at the end, or, yes.
Great. Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Thompson. If no one else has any questions or comments,
I had a
Tara?
question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi there, fellow survivor. Thank you so much for this. This was amazing. I work at a community organization, and I was really just thinking about this idea of, part of one of the most powerful things at events, right, are stories from survivors, right?
Mhm.
And really can kind of set the stage. And so I was wondering if you have any sort of shortened workshops, or if you'd be interested in collaborating on creating something where, community organizations who do have survivor speakers, but really wanting to be more grounded in this ethical we don't tell them what to say or anything like that, but like we let them speak. But there's probably a time limit at times, right? 15 minutes or 20 minutes, but would love to connect with you and just want to hear your thoughts on just, the survivors sharing their stories at public events and, kind of what your thoughts are on that.
I think that's really important. I would love to continue a discussion with you. As I think I said, I think that there are basically two major lines that seem to be there, and I would love for them to see them come together. I personally am now a little bit leery about this sort of public facing. Like every time someone says your story now, okay, the little thing in my brain, why? And then it's like, calm down and just ask them why, again, the purpose, what's going to happen to it, what did you have in mind? This is sort of what I have in mind. But definitely the stories are powerful. They need to be told. Whether it's the stories, I think someone said earlier, maybe it was Kristen, that there's a lot of trauma, but there's also a lot of other things too. I mean, in some odd way, say for instance, for me, if I told you the entire story of, I mean, everything, every boring detail since I started treatment 4 years ago or almost 4 years ago, I don't have a lot of trauma. I don't want to be like this actor who just said cancer was a gift. I'm not that delusional. But what I can say is cancer gave me a different sense of purpose. I don't have any medical. Like I said, my team is wonderful. The procedures are barbaric and traumatizing, but that's not about my team. It's about the current state of cancer care, what's available or whatever. But it gave me a sense of purpose, right? So I felt a renewed purpose, all these things that I trained to do, my theology background, my writing background, my PhD, all these things coming together. I had done other things with this, and it's like, wow, there are people in the cancer community who can actually use this. Oh, wait, and you're a survivor too. So you're not coming in on top of them and telling them what they should think or what this was like. I hear them when they talk about the trauma. I didn't like the infusion. No, nobody liked that. It was a little offensive. But okay, I hear that, but still the stories need to get out. So, no, I think there's a point to that. I'm always happy to talk to someone about what this might look like. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I will send a bunch of connection emails after this talk for sure. Thank you so much for sharing your your story of your research and how this is being developed and just building this program is really empowering for survivors. And thank you for doing it and thank you for speaking today.
So thank you for having me. So like I said, I'm looking for collaborators. And like I said, I've looked at, I've got way more materials than there was time to cover here. I would love to find someone who's willing to go in on a core engagement grant or something with me or whatever to do this. I realize money's a thing, but I'm looking for collaborators. And thank you, Dr. Mance, that you've made this possible, that at least now there are 20 other people that know that I'm here and doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much. And everyone, have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
rest of your weekend.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.